What's up, everybody? My name is Dr. Ryan Smith. I am a faculty for the Clinical Management and Fitness Athlete of ICE, or the Institute of Clinical Excellence. I am also COO of Recharge and Hoko CrossFit over here in Maryland. Today, what I'm going to talk to you about is load management in terms of quality versus quantity. So let's define these really quickly so we can get into, should we look at one versus the other, or both, or neither, and hopefully you'll make that kind of decision at the end here. So number one, what we're looking at is that the quality of load in terms of load management is directly related to the efficiency and the technique of the individual person. So I like looking at the quality of load because it helps us figure out, okay, where is this load being spread to in general, and what are the tissues that are being stressed the most. So what I like to say about that for the most part is let's take the example of a goblet squat, of where somebody's knees go forward first instead of them initiating with their hips. In general, when you ask those people where do they feel that squat, they'll say, well, I feel the front of my knees and my quads. Versus somebody who learns to kind of sit back into their hips more, they may be like, well, I tend to feel my hamstrings and butt a little bit more. So when I say quality of load, I say, well, person one who goes knees forward first is generally loading more of their anterior chain, their quads, and the knee joint itself. Whereas person two, who's able to sit back in their hips slightly a little bit more with technique that we would deem a little bit more efficient, spreads the load to their posterior chain as well as using their anterior chain. So I think it helps to distinguish quality load does not mean that there is a right or a wrong way to move. Rather, that quality load is saying the way you're moving is loading these particular tissues in this certain type of way. And that's, I think, a very empowering thing to do, because then we get past beyond the point of, well, you know, some of the greatest athletes in the world move with these dysfunctions and stuff. But yeah, of course. They're loading up those tissues, and maybe they've had so much training that they've loaded that pattern and they're very strong there. Of course, that makes a lot of sense if we look at load management and the quality of it from that aspect. It's an optimistic way to view it, and it allows us to give hope to those people of, hey, if we just switch where you're loading the tissues of your body, we can probably make this feel a lot better, a lot quicker, and keep moving. Perfect. So that's quality of load. Versus quantity is exactly what it sounds like. It's the number of reps, number of sets, the amount of weight they're doing. It's also quantifying what's the rate of loading they're using, or the peak of loading. Of say, a person who's running a 9-minute mile, right, who's kind of has a high volume of load but low peak forces, versus somebody who's doing double leg bounding, which is probably lower volume but high peak loads. That's also kind of quantifying what the types of loads are that are going through the body. So not just the expression of the movement technique itself, but the overall forces and vectors going through, as well as just the amounts of sets, reps, and the amount of weight that's going through. So there you have quality, which is focused on efficiency, what that technique is doing to load the certain types of tissue, and quantity, which is the type of load going through it and the amount that has that. So location specific and kind of what is being loaded, and more of the type and how much is being loaded. Now, there's been some really great papers out there and research done to show what should you look at first. Should you bring people's quantity down and make sure that they're moving really well before you load them up, or should you just make them move perfect then go, or don't worry about how well they're moving, just lower their quantity and allow them to build up in a graded exposure type of way. And that's kind of been the back and forth. Do I get people to move perfect first and then load them? Or what do I go by that way? And again, we know that perfect isn't the right word to use there. I get them to move in the way that we believe is most efficient and spreads the load, and then have them move. Now the kicker is, if you've had any coaching experience and you've ever tried to coach a group class, it is, I would dare say, impossible to make sure that everybody in the room is moving as efficiently and spreading the load as best as they possibly can. If you try to do that, you're going to get a very boring class very quickly. And you need to, furthermore, understand that if we truly believe that people are robust and adaptable, that we can allow some room for error and they can load in certain ways that we might not deem most efficient or the highest quality, but that they have that ability because they'll learn over time and they'll improve that pattern. So what generally we're seeing, and even what the research is showing, is you can't just pick quantity or quality, right? It's right? It's an and situation, not one or the other. It's both. Now that might seem quite obvious on the get-go, but think about all the times that you might have held somebody back from loading them up in a certain pattern because you're like, I need to see you move qualitatively a little better first. And then you go weeks and weeks and weeks and forgetting to actually loading that person to fatigue or to get actual adaptation that you're looking for, right? That's a serious thing that you need to consider of, man, have I actually underloaded this person because I've been trying to fix this pattern or get them to move qualitatively better and spread that load and it just hasn't worked. Well, maybe you're just underserving them and they need to be loaded appropriately to get the right stress to then build on from there. Or perhaps maybe you're more of the clinician who has gone about the road of, you know what, I'm gonna load them, just load it. You know what, oh, you got this going on, load it, load it, load it, load it, right? We hear that all the time. And that person's just like, you know what, whatever you do, let's just goblet squat, let's just do some kettlebell deadlifts, let's just hammer out 20 reps of these, whatever we need to do, let's just load you, and your body will adapt as it goes through. Well, the kicker there is that slight tweaks in that person's technique can change where that load can go and can affect how much that person's being loaded, right? In addition to, let's say you're doing some BFR, you want to hammer out a bunch of reps, and that person is doing these quarter squats, but they're always shifting to the right, and their left's the affected, well then great, you're doing a great job of loading that right side without ever technically looking at the quality of the load going into the left lower extremity. So again, that pendulum can swing back and forth very, very far. And you'll get the camps of people who want to really have everybody move in the highest quality they possibly can before they get loaded. And you'll have the camps of people that just want to load them. Please, in the very, very ICE fashion, make sure you're very much middle of the road. Be passionate about both ends. Be very picky with technique, but not to the point that you're forgetting this person still needs to get the optimal amount of stress and adaptation to do that. And oftentimes, that underlying theme there is us believing that the human body is robust and adaptable, and this person can withstand some room for error. So the way I coach this out, for instance, in my group classes that I've kind of applied to patient care as well, is giving people options. So let's take, for instance, the power clean with a barbell. The power clean with the barbell is an innately, very technical move and can definitely load people in very different ways. In general, most people don't have a great concept of the technical skill yet. They won't get true hip extension. They'll catch it with their elbows underneath, land in a little bit of lumbar extension, and their knees pretty far forward, maybe on their toes. To me, that's quality of movement is loading a lumbar spine and extension, and it's loading the anterior chain quite excessively. Now, low loads and getting people to learn the skill, that's perfectly fine. Now, if you load that pattern up and up and up and up and up, that's where you might have issues, right? But give them some leeway. So maybe instead of the barbell, we change it to a dumbbell hang clean, right? And they're able to work through full hip extension there, and they're able to sit back into more of a quality loaded squat. Or maybe even there, we're going to a medicine ball med clean, right? Of where they're going down, up, shrugging, and catching the squat, where it's very low load, but we can do high volume and quantity there. The med ball has a far greater room for air, and I can do much more quantity, versus the barbell, which is less room for air, and I need to be a little bit more specific at the quality of the movement we're looking at. But within that spectrum, you can find a way to challenge that person's skill appropriately, right? And get the adaptation from the amount of volume and stress needed to promote the positive adaptation we're going from. And from a compliance perspective, they get to have more fun. They get to get the right appropriate amount of challenge because you're meeting them where they're at and building up from there. It takes the understanding of both the quality of the movement that you're looking for and the quantity and the types of forces going through that person's body to judge that appropriately and get the best bang for your buck. I really want you to start getting along the fact of, do not celebrate the fact that you've made somebody extremely sore and knocked out the next morning where they can barely get up the stairs. But maybe for most patients, they need to be met where they're at of like, you know what, I felt that workout, but I was still good the next day. Perfect. Let's keep you there for a little bit. Most people need to earn the ability and to slowly build into that type of intensity, and I think that's for a lot of patients. In that same spectrum, for those fitness athletes you've had for a long period of time, you can keep them moving, doing the skill sets they want to work on, the power clean, by building the bike, by building context for, hey, this is why we're doing the med balls or the dumbbells instead of the barbell. And this is the ability for you to take a step back, work on your technical skill and the quality of the movement, and we can still administer enough quantity to keep you high up there in those adaptations and keep your strength and skill. So it is never a quality versus a quantity discussion. It's always an and. One does not need to come before the other. For some people, maybe it's a quantity first issue of we need to take them back a little bit and build up in a graded exposure way. For others, maybe we don't even need to touch the quantity, but we need to make small technical changes that spreads the load differently, that changes how that person feels. Ultimately, it comes down to, you can't cheat feel, that person giving you their subjective feedback of where the load is going, of how their body responds to load later that evening, the next morning, and 48 hours after is the ultimate determinant. The last part of that, I think, is that 48-hour thing of, in general, if you're playing with quantity of load, and that person generally feels pretty good in the moment with their quality of load, it'll take that morning after or 24 to 48 hours for you to really see your symptom behavior change if you're just playing with quantity. So a lot of graded exposure perspective of that, a lot of delayed type of sort of feels or sort of aches or pains, you're going to have to look at that way in quantity. If someone has some tendonitis that takes a while to flare up, you might not feel it in the middle of the workout, or tendinopathy, but you might feel it for 24 to 48 hours. And that's where getting that quantity of load is being very, very specific for them. Versus somebody who you can make a change with a qualitative approach to their movement right away and it feels different in session, perfect. And you load up that pattern as we go through. The last piece of this I want to talk about, whether it's quality or quantity, is the idea of what fatigue plays on how much quantity you can do and what the quality of the movement is like. And I want to approach this from a research aspect. I think it's still quite up in the air of what effect fatigue has on injury, right? And I think in general, our predictive ability for most injuries in any aspect is pretty low in terms of a research perspective. So fatigue in there, changing the quality of the movement and what that it does for the load and intensity of the tissues, I think is still up there. Anecdotally, I'd like to say, man, I'd be hard pressed to say when someone adds a lot of intensity and gets very fatigued, their quality of movement changes at some point. And that changes the load of the tissues going into. So I need to look at that person, their fatigue of the quality of their movement and see if that maintains. So maybe it's not a quantity issue. Maybe it's at a certain quantity, the quality of their movement is degraded to the point of they're loading the tissues differently, and that's kind of bringing on their symptoms or changing their symptom behavior. That's more of a coach perspective and less, I think, what's being seen in the research, because I know there's been a lot of stuff out there saying fatigue isn't directly related to causing injuries, and I don't think we can say anything ever is directly related to causing injuries other than what we're kind of seeing in terms of maybe it increases the risk. So change those themes of how you talk about quality versus quantity in terms of it's not an or situation, it's both. That quality does not mean there's a perfect movement that determines it. Quality just means this is your movement pattern and behavior. When you move like that, this is typically what tissues are getting loaded the most, and this may or may not be aggravating or sensitizing to what you're feeling. And quantity takes into consideration not just reps, sets, and weight, but also the forces going through. A running could be high volume, low peak forces, whereas double leg bounding could be low volume, high peak forces, and that can have effect. All those being said, the human body is robust and adaptable. Give people some room for error to learn how to load themselves appropriately and build up an intensity, and try to see what role fatigue plays on it and load people in fatigue states and see if that changes anything. So I hope that helps out with your ability to look at, do I look at the quality of someone's movement or the quantity of their movement? In reality, it's both. Stay middle of the road. Don't let that pendulum swing one way or the other. Build the damn bike, and you'll get a lot of great symptom behavior feedback from your patient, a lot of buy-in, and you'll be a great clinician in the long run working with fitness athletes. So hope you guys have a great rest of your Friday, a great weekend. I know there's a lot of stuff coming up from ICE. We just kicked off our Advanced Concepts and Foundations course for the fitness athlete. New cohorts for that have opened up in August. And I know we're running through. I know Justin Dunaway is going to be in Blacksburg, Virginia next month, and then he's here at Recharge in August for a total spine thrust manipulation course. So please, by all means, get after that. We got a lot of live weekends for the fitness athlete coming up as well. So I hope you guys had a great 4th. Hope you enjoy the rest of the weekend. We'll talk to you later. Thanks.